We are tracking 3 critical coordinate points around Moscow, hid in a tactical strike that threatens the capital city's entire air shield: Pudalkovo, Kommunarka, and Domodedovo. No armor has breached the outer defense perimeter yet. There is no heavy ground combat inside the city, but the Atesh resistance claims tactical comms masts were neutralized, taking down vital links to the regional air defense network. If these reports hold true, the Kremlin did not just lose hardware. Russia is staring down a massive systemic failure. Their air defense grid is suddenly running blind, reacting too late, and leaving massive corridors exposed, just as Ukraine accelerates long-range drone strikes deep inside Russia. Zoom out to the theater. Moscow airspace has been locked down, refineries are burning, and critical assets are compromised. Supply hubs are in the crosshairs, and vital comms networks deep behind the front are failing. So, what does this tactical sabotage really tell us? How can light tactical masts cripple a massive air defense grid? And how is Ukraine taking the war directly to Russia's backyard? Let's analyze the intel. A communications mast looks basic, but near Moscow it houses highly sensitive electronic warfare assets. That is why this partisan strike matters far more than just the charred metal left behind. Underground fighters report neutralizing multiple communications nodes across the region, hitting Pudalkovo, Kommunarka, and the Domodedovo sector. These zones directly ring the capital, a fortress city protected by the most dense air shield on the planet. Intel reports suggest those targeted masts fed data directly into Russia's local air defense grid. These sensors were designed to spot low-altitude threats, routing tactical target data, and coordinating defensive fire across interceptor units. If that report stands, they did not just destroy wire and steel. They severed the central nervous system that allows Moscow to track, process, and engage incoming threats before they breach the city. Air defense is not a single missile battery. It is an integrated chain of sensors, radars, and command hubs. Snap one link, and the physical damage seems minor on the surface, but the paralysis cascades. This is why tactical data links dictate the outcome of modern battles. The launcher is just the kinetic effector. The real weapon is the invisible stream of targeting data. Radar detects. Sensors confirm the signature. The command center routes the firing solution to the active battery. This entire sequence demands microsecond speed, absolute clarity, and uncompromised data integrity. Slam that feed, and even the most advanced defense grid stalls out. The missiles are loaded, the radar crews are standing by, but without early warning, the threat is already on top of them before they can even designate the target. For Moscow, a split-second delay carries extreme political fallout along with tactical risk. The capital sector is no ordinary battleground. It is the nerve center of state power, and a breach here shatters the illusion of total domestic security. We must treat these reports with caution. The full scale of the tactical outage remains unconfirmed. Information warfare routinely outpaces hard battle damage assessments in this theater. Yet, the strategic takeaway stands. This deep recon strike proves the priority targets are no longer armor, trenches, or frontline aircraft. They are the invisible synapses linking early warning to intercept systems. The looming threat is far worse. What happens when these sensors must track low altitude, low radar signature targets? The defensive weakness starts right there. Low-altitude threats slip under radar horizons, turning a layered defense into a chaotic, last-second scramble. According to Atesh, the sabotage heavily compromised specific hardware used to track low-altitude threats and vector regional intercept battery responses. We must monitor this closely, as the complete degradation of their systems is still being assessed. But the tactical reality is obvious. A long-range strike drone doesn't require hypersonic speed to stress a defense grid. It just needs fuel capacity, a pre-programmed flight path, and a blind spot in the radar coverage. In this theater, geography offers no safety. It all comes down to reaction times and raw intelligence. Running low-altitude sorties changes the game because the terrain itself masks the incoming threat vector. Drones slip right under the radar envelope, hugging tree lines, structures, waterways, and jagged valleys. That forces air defense crews to isolate hostile tracks from clutter. They aren't invisible, but early warning windows shrink to seconds. For a crew on the battery, detection is just step one. You have to acquire the track, verify it, relay coordinates, and assign a fire unit. Any comms bottleneck allows the threat to advance while the command post scrambles to build its map. That latency is lethal. A few minutes seems trivial, but even a slow-moving UAV covers critical ground in that window. If that threat is pressing a high-value asset, commanders must choose: execute a rapid launch, wait for positive identification, or push systems to red alert. Deep inside Moscow airspace, this failure point carries massive strategic consequences. This capital is the absolute center of Russian state authority, fortified by the most sophisticated defense umbrella in the country. Any breach of this airspace inflicts a devastating psychological blow to the regime. Citizens don't see the radar batteries, but they feel the grounded flights, sirens, and sudden lockdowns, and state briefings on drone shootdowns. These disruptions drag the front line directly to their doorsteps. Recently, Russian defense officials have repeatedly tracked hostile UAVs probing the Moscow Oblast, forcing strategic air hubs across the capital to shut down operations mid-crisis. These groundings are standard protocol, but they expose how easily asymmetric long-range aviation can paralyze a megacity. It destroys the Kremlin's illusion of total security. Moscow is marketed as an impenetrable fortress of state control, but when the capital constantly scrambles its defenses, that narrative shatters. Even a successful intercept proves the defense network is under immense, exhausting strain. The shield is working, but it is bleeding resources. This low-altitude drone threat is exactly what will define the next phase of this entire war. Moscow still commands a deep defense-in-depth layout, elite radar crews, heavy electronic warfare jamming, and layered missile rings. The capital is not wide open to attack. Rather, it is about systemic fatigue as swarms of cheap targets constantly probe and map their radar holes. Every alert triggers panic. Every airport lockdown exposes their vulnerability to the public. Every intercept ties down critical assets desperately needed on the active front lines. For Kyiv, this tactical leverage pays off even without a single kinetic explosion on target. It forces Russian command to pull defenses back, guard domestic assets, and fight a defensive battle in their own airspace. When civilian airfields, surface-to-air missile batteries, and the capital's entire outer ring must react, this is no longer just a minor act of sabotage. This is a systematic, ongoing campaign. Kyiv is steadily escalating the deep battle, mapping weaknesses one route, one warning, and one strike at a time. This attrition strategy lays the vital groundwork for sustained, long-range, deep-strike operations. Kyiv is looking far past trench warfare because the Russian war machine's logistics tail is deeply exposed. Ukrainian forces are systematically striking the rear infrastructure, keeping the enemy supplied, repaired, fueled, and operational. The target list spans refineries, fuel farms, defense plants, supply lines, and tactical air defenses, and command and control nodes. Don't mistake this for Kyiv abandoning the close fight. It means the battlespace now directly links industrial plants, logistics hubs, and command nodes hundreds of miles deep. In modern mechanized warfare, a frontline soldier's survival depends entirely on diesel, ammunition, heavy supply lines, and functional communications. Sever those lines of communication, and the combat power at the front rapidly decays and collapses. This is exactly why deep interdiction has become a core pillar of Ukraine's strategic campaign, not some sideshow or mere retaliatory gesture. Refineries are high-value targets. In modern warfare, fuel is the very lifeblood of the war machine. Armor, troop carriers, artillery systems, logistics, trucks, and air assets all collapse without a constant supply chain. When a refinery is hit, the damage goes far deeper than the fireball captured on camera. Repairs drag on, stockpiles must shift, routes reroute, and security around sister facilities must be redoubled immediately. Just a temporary bottleneck forces hostile command to make brutal triage decisions on who gets fuel first. Combat operations clash directly with civilian power grids, export contracts, and strategic reserves. This is exactly how targeting energy networks triggers systemic pressure way beyond the blast zone. These strikes may not halt an advance instantly, but they drastically spike the cost of sustaining that push. Over time, High friction dictates strategy, especially when relentless strikes disrupt operational planning and force critical resets. The strike on Syzran proves just how far this campaign reaches. The refinery in Samara sits hundreds of kilometers from the border, yet drone strikes have punched right through to hit it. This deep strike capability completely redraws the adversary's threat matrix. Deep rear areas, once considered safe, now demand heavy security, dedicated air defense, active jamming, and rapid response engineering teams. Each newly fortified target drains critical assets. High Command cannot secure every single refinery, fuel depot, factory, rail yard, and forward base with maximum defensive density. Forcing the enemy to dilute their air defenses triggers a brutal dilemma. Screen the front, protect the capital, shield energy grids, or leave massive blind spots exposed elsewhere. This strategic dilemma gets worse as the strike envelope expands deep into territory that once felt entirely safe. The operational objective here goes far beyond creating cinematic explosions. It is about forcing the adversary to constantly scramble, repair, relocate, and adapt. One crippled depot chokes supply lines. One sabotaged factory delays vital spare parts. Severed communications lines degrade vital coordination between rear echelons and frontline combat teams. Individually, these are minor friction points. Collectively, they paralyze operations. This asymmetric pressure allows forces to degrade a larger adversary without committing to costly ground offensives. It systematically dismantles the infrastructure keeping their offensive machinery running. The damage accumulates slowly, but this creeping pressure reshapes enemy options and forces commanders to operate under constant operational friction. But strategic airstrikes are only half the battle. If partisan claims are accurate, clandestine sabotage networks are actively striking command and control nodes directly inside the enemy homeland. A reported partisan operation in Sverdlovsk targets a critical vulnerability: military communications deep behind the front lines. While defenses around Moscow shield the capital, the Sverdlovsk interdiction strikes directly at their logistical nerve center. Intelligence reports suggest clandestine cells sabotaged a critical communications node handling encrypted data and rear area combat logistics. This strike severed secure data links to the central military district, delaying troop movements and heavy armor transfers heading toward the Pokrovsk sector. We must treat this update with caution, as battle damage assessments are still unverified. Regardless, this target selection reveals exactly how intelligence networks are identifying critical weaknesses in the rear. They are moving beyond physical assets like rail lines, ammo dumps, and fuel farms. They are hunting the command circuits that mobilize these forces. Modern militaries do not run on horsepower alone. Tactical action requires secure transmission of coordinates, command signals, and reports. A mechanized convoy can possess full fuel tanks, heavy armor, and personnel, but if high command is cut off, troop movements stall out and fall into disarray. A reserve battle group might be combat ready, but they cannot deploy without routes, schedules, coordinate integration, and real-time situational intelligence from the active front. This is why signal networks hold tactical value far outweighing their physical footprint. They link logistical staging areas directly to active combat zones, allowing commanders to convert raw reserves into kinetic battlefield power. When we analyze these disruptions, the tactical fallout may not look like a shattered tank or burning depot. Instead, we see frozen convoys, fractured command coordination, and sluggish combat reinforcement, or sheer tactical paralysis on the ground. This Sverdlovsk operation directly impacts the heavy fighting on the Donetsk front. Partisans claim this sabotage node directly routed Russian combat deployments toward Pokrovsk. If verified, this proves frontline pressure is being shaped hundreds of miles from the active trenches. A combat victory in Donetsk can hinge entirely on a single relay station or command channel deep inside Russia. Modern warfare demands seamless, uninterrupted data links between staging areas, supply depots, logistical planners, and tactical headquarters. This explains why covert sabotage operations and long-range drone strikes act as complementary force multipliers. Direct drone strikes neutralize hard, visible targets like fuel refineries, ammunition depots, and air defense batteries. Sabotage strikes the silent nervous system, local relays, and data streams. One produces explosive, visual confirmation. The other injects systemic friction, choking the flow of orders and critical supplies to the front. For Moscow, the threat is not a single catastrophic strike, but the relentless, compounding accumulation of friction. A single hit is manageable, but multi-theater disruptions force massive reallocations of security, repair units, and patrol assets, guarding the rear, bleeding off troops and focus needed elsewhere. For Kyiv, the strategic messaging is unmistakable. This war will not be contained to the blood-soaked trenches of Donetsk. Strikes are hitting the key architecture that allows Russia to command, reinforce, and sustain its forces. From Moscow communications towers to military nodes in Sverdlovsk, Ukraine is proving the deep rear is no longer safe from combat. This raises a critical strategic question. Can the Kremlin continue keeping this war outside of its own borders? President Zelensky's messaging on these Moscow area strikes targets a far wider audience than just the Russian high command. For Ukrainian planners, the goal is not merely hitting a single target or inflicting localized structural damage. The strategic objective is bringing the realities of conflict directly to soil Moscow desperately tried to insulate from war. When Ukrainian drones penetrate Moscow airspace, the implications escalate to both a military and highly political level. It shatters the myth that Moscow can rain fire on Ukrainian cities while its own command centers remain untouched. The Moscow Oblast holds immense strategic weight because it represents far more than mere terrain. It is the epicenter of Russian political authority, the showpiece of state power, and one of the most heavily fortified air defense zones in the Federation. The Kremlin has ringed the capital with elite air defense assets specifically to project total military dominance and control. Yet, when hostile drones trigger air raid sirens or force emergency airport closures, that narrative of control rapidly unravels. For us, this is why the tactical fallout matters far beyond one city. This is a battle over strategic confidence, deterrence, and air defense limits. Zelensky is weaponizing these strikes to signal a brutal, inescapable reality. Geographical distance no longer guarantees survival. Kyiv is signaling to its allies, its public, and the Kremlin that long-range strike capabilities have permanently altered the conflict's psychological map. Striking targets over 500 kilometers away won't win this alone, but it fundamentally shifts how leaders calculate operational risk. This escalating pressure presents a severe tactical dilemma for Moscow. Redeploying batteries to protect the capital forces' high command to choose which radar units, crews, and electronic warfare assets to strip from elsewhere. The front lines in occupied Crimea remain highly vulnerable. Critical air bases, logistical rail hubs, and manufacturing facilities all demand protection. No military can defend every key asset with equal density simultaneously. That is how asymmetric deep strikes radically drive up the war's cost. These operations do not need to systematically dismantle Russia's military network to succeed. They only need to compel constant redeployments, emergency repairs, and defensive paranoia. Every added layer siphons critical command attention and logistical assets from active fronts. Ultimately, these strikes shatter Russian domestic morale. A drone alert shaking the capital is a psychological blow Donetsk could never deliver. It is creeping closer, highly visible, and bleeding directly into their daily lives. Even with minimal damage, these sirens prove their safe rear zones are no longer secure. Yet, let us be realistic. Deep strikes alone do not guarantee tactical victory, and the Russian defensive network remains massive. Their true power is cumulative, straining Moscow, overextending their air defenses, and driving up the political price of this war. But this political fallout is only the first layer. The next phase strikes deep into the economic engine feeding Russia's war machine. Ukrainian long-range strikes have expanded far beyond strictly military assets. They aim to destabilize the enemy rear, hitting fuel, transport, heavy industry, and air defense, and fracturing civilian resolve. The immediate tactical impact begins directly with enemy troop movement. Modern combat forces require fuel for armor, logistics, and heavy artillery, tactical support vehicles, and combat aviation. Striking a refinery, fuel depot, or supply line will not halt an offensive immediately, but it forces emergency repairs, complex rerouting, and critical delays, while diverting security forces, ultimately choking the logistics network feeding frontline Russian troops. The economic attrition is equally devastating. Fuel is not merely a tactical resource. For the Kremlin, it funds the state, drives industry, and maintains domestic control. When refineries burn and production plummets, Moscow faces surging repair costs, supply bottlenecks, and volatile fuel markets. Minor disruptions quickly compound when multiple sectors are targeted systematically. That is why deep strike operations are highly effective, even if the immediate local damage seems minor. The political impact relies on pure visibility. Air raid sirens over major cities, grounded flights, and blazing energy plants send a chilling signal to civilians living far from the trenches. It proves this conflict is no longer confined to the occupied zones or the Ukrainian front lines. The war has breached the Russian rear guard, shattering the illusion of safety that the Kremlin fights to maintain. Strategically, this presents an impossible defense dilemma for Russian command. Every vulnerable facility demands dedicated defensive assets. Moscow, refineries, airfields, and command posts cannot all be shielded by dense radar, electronic warfare, Panzer systems, and rapid response units. Redeploying air defenses to one sector leaves another zone critically exposed. This is why Ukraine's deep strike campaign succeeds, even without spectacular, immediate combat results. The goal is to overextend Russian defenses, bleed their assets, and force constant tactical reactions. Over time, this degrades the entire logistical network sustaining frontline operations. Today, we are witnessing a major shift in modern warfare. The theater of operations no longer stops at the forward trenches. It now encompasses logistics, energy grids, tactical communication lines, and civilian morale. Modern combat is a war of systems, not just a battle for territory. Sabotage operations near Moscow prove that contemporary warfare has evolved far beyond conventional trench lines or armored clashes. A single communication tower, an electronic warfare hub, or a disrupted airport is now a high-priority combat zone. Ukraine is executing multi-domain pressure, pairing infrastructure sabotage with deep drone strikes targeting fuel refineries, supply chains, and air defenses. We must not misread this as a single, decisive knockout blow. Russia retains vast strategic depth and massive defensive capacity. But the operational effect is gradual, cumulative, and highly strategic. Every strike forces the Kremlin to stretch air defenses and redeploy assets, absorb rising damage, and manage growing chaos in the rear. If this tempo holds, Russian command faces a brutal choice. Secure the capital, shield energy infrastructure, protect critical air bases, or reinforce frontline combat units while another critical vulnerability is exposed. If this intelligence briefing helped you decode the mechanics of modern warfare, subscribe to Military Force for our next tactical breakdown. We track these battlefields not to glorify the destruction, but to dissect how advanced weaponry, tactics, and political directives impact boots on the ground. Report your intelligence in the comments. What is the next flashpoint? And why is a ceasefire harder yet critical as this theater of war continues to escalate?